In a world where Twitter leads the headlines and the 24-hour news cycle forces people to choose sides, we're here to help you cut through the noise and discover that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Hosted by entrepreneur, author, public speaker, and regular media contributor Seth Denson. Subscribe, share, rank, and review. Welcome to Somewhere in the Middle on the Real News Communication Network.
Hey everybody, it's Monday, and you know what that means? You're finding yourself somewhere in the middle today. I'm having a little fun with technology in here, Zach. I'm trying to figure out how do I keep my one-track mind on what we're going to be talking about today.
You got a lot going on in there.
As well as technology. I've got a new device. I'm in technology overload, which new device for me means it's like the second edition of the iPad.
Okay. Well, hey, you got to start somewhere.
We're edition 12 probably now.
Sure, yeah, something like that.
But anyway, welcome back. It is Monday. Monday means somewhere in the middle. We're excited to have you here. If you're fighting your case of the Mondays, you've come to the right place because we got the antidote.
Yeah.
Listen, joined as always by Mr. Apple Zackintosh himself in the booth. Zach, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm good, man. Great weekend.
Yeah.
Took the kids to a water park this weekend.
Really?
Escaped the Texas heat in summer by sitting outside.
You want to give a shameless plug to this water park?
The Great Wolf Lodge.
Okay, everybody in. Yeah,
a lot of fun folks here, and if you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Grapevine, Texas, Great Wolf Lodge. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Brother came in with his kids, so
all right.
We had the big family out and had a lot of fun and made the most of it.
Great Wolf, we're looking for sponsorships, so hit us up.
There you go.
Slip us a resume. How about that?
Come on.
Everybody in.
Big plans for you this weekend, or did you have fun?
I stayed in, actually. Christine is going to be out and about for the next few weeks. She's going to be going to conventions, and she's got tons of stuff going on. So just hanging out, watching Netflix, spending time with each other. It was a good time.
Good time.
It was mostly me spending time with her. She wasn't super into me hanging out with. It's fine. It's fine. I'm not upset about it. It's great. Anyway, how about the show? Yeah,
how about the show today?
Yeah.
Well, listen, we've also got, as always, Mr. Andrew Clark in the booth with us. Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing just fine.
You're looking like a Dapper Dan man today, brother.
I actually got called out last week for just the button down.
Yeah.
Someone said, hey, he's in a suit. Why aren't you? It's like, oh, well, then I'll tidy up a little bit.
Hey, I like it, man. Looking sharp. Still, for those of you on camera, you can't see. Still in blue jeans. We're not going too far here.
There's the jeans.
But we do have the vest. We've got the tie on today. You got the nice cufflinks.
Thank you very much.
Sharp.
Yeah. Hey,
awesome.
we're in Dallas. Even the billionaires wear blue jeans. All right, that's what they're all about.
No judgment here. Hey, listen. Interestingly enough, as we're talking about what we're going to be talking about today, thinking through things, we're coming up on midterms.
We are.
Right? And Zach actually tossed this topic out to me, about a week ago?
Yeah, something like that. I was surprised you took the bait on it.
I loved it, man.
Yeah.
I loved it. We're going to sit back and swing at it, right? So the idea here is that the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party doing themselves disservice by how they are marketing themselves to their possible constituents.
Right.
And what I mean by that is the Democratic Party has become, or at least from a soundbite perspective, the party of all, right? If you are super rich or super poor, or you have maybe you are a minority or women or gay, transgender, bisexual, homosexual,
LGBTQ,
right?
cover the whole thing.
Thank you.
Gotcha.
I was looking for the acronym in my mind. I'm going, all right, I'm going to miss this.
It was there. It's fine.
But we're your party. That's the Democratic Party way. And so, interestingly enough, in the same token, I think what the Republican Party has done as of late has cast a narrow net. So in growing up when I was a kid, I remember Ronald Reagan talking about the GOP, the Grand Old Party, the Republican Party, as the party of the Big Tent, right?
Sure.
So we're all are welcome. But as time has gone on, and especially since I think what happened is after the Tea Party movement, which moved into things like the Freedom Caucus, we found the Republicans casting a much more narrow net.
Yeah, I think Obama winning in 2008 definitely moved some things. Yeah, that's when the Tea Party got started. And it's worth noting, since I have my opportunity, my history handy, Reagan announced his run for presidency in Mississippi, which meant something back then. Yeah, that was very much a movement of like, hey, everybody in, all right, this is inclusive. That stood for something.
Well, and prior to that, you had this whole Southern Democrat movement, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, and this went all the way back to the Civil War era, where there was still some folks holding on that the South would rise again.
Oh, sure.
And then when Reagan came out and made his announcement, and he's a California guy.
Big time.
Right?
Yeah.
So what does that mean? What did that do? And he talked about his big tent and inviting more folks into the conversation. And then somehow over time we have morphed away from that from a Republican's perspective and said, no, these are our principles and these are what we would believe. And if you aren't in line with this, you're out. And I think when Trump ran, he tried to recast that net, but it was an interesting way of doing it because he pandered to the base, which could be considered the ultra right wing. It's Mondays
wing.
again.
Could be considered,
I'm having a tongue twister thing
right.
again, like I did last week. The right wing side of things, but he would say some of the right things some of the time, but have the Democrats though cast such a wide net that their wide net isn't about coming and being part of a solution. Theirs is more about what can we give you. Right. How can we provide you with more of what is important to you? And by doing that, have the Democrats painted themselves into the corner that there's no way that they can possibly deliver on all of the promises that they are making.
Right. And I think it's a problem for any party. How do you please everybody? But the issue is with such a wide range of demographics that seem to be present in the Democratic Party, that is a much bigger question, than the Republicans, who seem to have things a little bit more ironed out. They seem to know what they're about. They've got a base. Like we can look at poll numbers for approval ratings and disapproval ratings for the president. Like they kind of know where they're at. And Democrats, meanwhile, seem to be a little bit more up in the air. And so I was curious if you guys felt this way, what your thoughts are about that. Yeah.
I do, and maybe I'll open this up to a little bit more of my own personal convictions on this. So historically, and I've made this comment on this show before, so this is nothing new to people if you've listened to the show, is that I have historically considered myself a conservative. I have historically voted much more often on the Republican ticket than I have on the Democratic ticket. Although I've voted on both sides, depending on the person, but by no means would I consider myself a Democrat. Historically, I would consider myself a Republican. I supported most of the Republican candidates throughout my early voting years and have historically done so throughout. However, I have seen this shift in what we call the Republican Party over time, and I am concerned. I'm concerned as somebody who would formerly have considered themselves a Republican. Now I do consider myself a free-thinking American, and I want to look at the people, not the party, to determine who I think is the best fit. But at the same time, my own personal convictions are probably going to lean a bit more conservative, although I would consider myself probably a more liberal conservative.
Sure.
If that's a thing.
It's 2018, why not?
Right?
Yeah.
Versus a right-wing conservative. And I am much more in the sphere of, let's think from a fiscal responsibility aspect, more conservative. But at the same time, there are people who can't help themselves, and we need to have a way to help those folks. And then at the same time, I don't want the government making overreaching requirements of me and how I live my life so long as I'm not harming the other. And that's a very conservative statement. But as soon as you start making that breach into things like gay rights, right?
Sure.
Then now all of a sudden, no, we're okay with the government reaching in that area. And I don't necessarily believe in that, and we'll take on that on another topic because I think that's a show in and of itself. And I do have some hot sports opinions that may surprise some, but may not surprise all on that. But Andrew, what are your thoughts coming from California, where predominantly Democrat-run state? California is in this dire place of overcommitments from a tax and payments perspective. What is your take on where we are as a society, specifically around political parties and what they're committing to or not?
Well, California has a specific shift in that if you're in the big cities, it's super left-wing. I lived in San Francisco for more than half a decade. Don't need to see too much more on that particular subject. But then when you go out into when you're driving down the 5 freeway, right? Drive down the 5, and you're going through farmland, it's nothing but make America great again. Trump, Trump, Trump. I mean, it's this very harsh divide. Out of the big cities, super red. In the cities, very blue. And one of the challenges you see politically, we're talking about the Democrats there, with all these overpromises, is I've seen that it's all or nothing with a lot of people my age and my generation. If a politician is against their view on one or two of their major points, doesn't matter if they line up 95% of the rest, I'll never vote for him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, oh, he's so excellent in all these things, but he doesn't believe in gay marriage, I can't vote for him. It's like, well, what about his fiscal policies, his immigration policies, his commerce policies? Nope, gay marriage, can't vote for him.
Yeah.
And that leads to, again, we've seen these jungle primaries coming up, and now you've got 10 different Democrats with each varying flavors of slight variations, and the votes just go all sorts of directions.
Yeah.
So this will be very curious to see how the midterms come up.
Well, so historically, we kind of did some analysis on some of this, and especially over the last 2 decades, what we have found is that Republicans have historically done very well in midterm elections, while the Democrats, you know, specifically with the Obama administration, but even we can go back as far as Al Gore, they won the popular vote then. They won the popular vote even this last election with Hillary Clinton. But the Electoral College has pushed the Republican over the top based on what you just talked about. You get outside of the metro areas, you get more into the rural areas, and this is where the Electoral College still has a play in our political climate. But overall, as a population, the Democrats tend to do much better in national elections, but not so good in the midterm elections. And I think part of that could be because people pay attention more. And when you're paying attention, what do you need to do? You need to make sure you appeal to the masses. You throw that cast that net out to say to the vast majorities, we have what you need, right? We have what you're looking for. So come vote for us so we can give it to you. Versus in the midterms, when we're talking about Congress and we're talking about the Senate, and we're talking about even more local elections, it's hard to get that national singular movement out there into the public sphere to motivate enough people to get out for the vote.
Well, I have to imagine what works up here in Dallas would not fly in Austin, you know, or Houston or San Antonio. So it is much more localized.
Sure.
It is. And I think we see that across the country, right?
I think so. I think Texas certainly has an odd reflection of California. I heard once if any 2 states were to get in a civil war with each other, it'd be Texas and California.
I could see it.
And I don't spend a lot of time in California, so I you know, maybe I don't know why, but it does sound oddly similar. I think Texas's voting maps are similar to California in that way, that our rural areas seem, or our cities seem to vote blue, our rural areas vote red, and that's where we're at. I know people talk about maybe a potential shift. In the last episode, we talked about Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz and where things might be going there. That's neither here nor there. But I think you're right. Nationally, it's a lot easier to garner attention from a large group and say, hey, everybody point that way, right? Versus the little elections, the locals, the state elections. Like that's where we seem to get hung up. But I don't know what the best way is to do something about that, right? Like, how do you inform a base if it's maybe too big or maybe too small? I don't know.
I think that's that's kind of where we're going with this, right? If we think short term, right? If we think short term, it's okay to make all these promises to all these people.
Sure.
But eventually, those chickens are going to come home to roost. And they're going to say, well, wait a minute, what have you done for me lately? I mean, listen, we saw that post the Obama administration where a lot of people who historically had been Obama supporters came out and said, wait a minute, you made a lot of promises to us that you didn't follow through on, you didn't get it done. And Obama, listen, he got into office and realized it's not as easy as making promises. That making promises is easy, keeping promises is kind of hard.
Sure.
Because you're not the sole orchestrator of following through on those promises. You've got Congress to contend with. You have the Supreme Court to contend with. You have a number of other aspects that play into this. And so let's break this maybe into 2 segments, and not segments that we'll take a break, but segments that we'll talk about. Let's talk first and foremost about the Democratic Party. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that they throw out there. Tax the wealthy.
Okay.
Right? That everybody should pay their fair share, but their fair share is not a percentage, rather a component. And what I mean by that is if I make more, I should pay more, not just necessarily as a percentage, but even more of a percentage of my income to try to level things out so that we can help take care of those who maybe can't help themselves.
Right, and also an attempt to exactly that, level things out.
That's right.
Everybody pays an even proportion of whatever you make. Yeah, it all comes out.
Healthcare. Right? Healthcare should be a right that is afforded to all. Everybody should have healthcare, possibly on the far left extreme of that, universal healthcare. But if not, somewhere in the range of more affordable healthcare. And again, for those of you who don't know, I'm in the healthcare industry. I can have a whole topic, and we will, on what affordable healthcare really means. By the way, it doesn't mean more affordable health insurance.
Right.
That is a byproduct of more cost-effective health care, which is oftentimes lost in the conversation, I think. But you have that component. You have open border policy. And interestingly enough, what we've seen over the last few months is we've seen more legal immigrants come out and say, well, wait a minute, we don't like this idea of this. We're here now.
Right.
And our jobs are contingent upon them staying available to legal immigration. By no means am I saying that there are this groundswell of legal immigrants who are coming up in support of Trump, in support of immigration enforcement the way it's structured right now. But we are seeing more and more of people who have come to the country legally say, wait a minute, we're not so on board with this whole open borders idea. But that's another thing. Right. So we're moving the needle there. Tolerance of LGBTQ community.
Sure.
Right?
Very much
more
so.
rights there.
Embracing of, you could argue.
That's exactly right. So these are all women's rights. Not to say, you have the whole Me Too movement. You have this movement of women's rights for equal pay.
Sure.
Women's rights as far as the right to choose versus the right to life and that whole argument.
Yeah.
So you do have this very wide net of a lot of people they're making commitments to. Fast forward 4, 6, 8 years down the road, if you deliver to half of your base, you've probably accomplished a lot.
Sure.
But you've alienated half your base because you haven't delivered on the promises either.
Right. And if your base is freaking huge, you got a problem because that's a lot of people that are now out on the outs. So that's an issue. The other one I was going to throw in was also issues of racial equality. Black Lives Matter.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's in there. So
yep.
I don't know. Yeah. So what's the play here? If you have any kind of imbalance, if you have one party that may be too big, it's trying to meet too many people. The people that really intrigued me when I was thinking about this topic were people who were more not necessarily younger, but I've run into people who are my age, people in college, who didn't want to vote Democrat because they're not left enough. Mm-hmm. Which is weird to me because on a national scale, it's like, well, we got a two-party system. This is kind of the way it is. I mean, you're welcome to vote third party. People talk about throwing a vote away. That's topic for another show.
There you go.
That's
I like how we're lining up the next probably 12 weeks of topics.
We're really stacking the deck here. But I don't know. I was just curious how you guys feel about this. Dig me out of a hole here, Andrew. Come on, help me out.
What are your thoughts on this?
So whereas you used to be a Republican, for a long time I was a Democrat. And then I had the same kind of challenges. It was so to the left, we just weren't on board with it. So if you want to talk about fairness, what's fair? Well, is that the result? Let's go to taxes, start at the top there.
Sure.
Yep. Taxes. A flat tax is fair. I pay 10% of what I make, you pay 10% or 30 or whatever number we're going to pay here. If you make 100,000 and pay 30%, you pay 30. If I make 10,000, I give you 3. That's fair proportionally. But that's not the way that party wants that to work. They want it to be an exponential scale. The more you make, the more you pay.
Right.
So you end up with an end result that's monetarily similar, but not necessarily fair.
Yeah, to that point, though, I think they almost have to, because if they want to pay for half the stuff they promised, they have to collect more money. I used to make this statement all the time, right, wrong, or indifferent, that I was neither rich enough nor was I poor enough to be considered a Democrat.
That's good.
Right? Because I made too much money, but not enough money that I needed to try to hold on to more of it, or that I was getting enough out of the system that it made sense for me to vote Democrat because, I fell in the middle there. And we do talk about, and Zach, I think you even mentioned this when we were talking about this topic, that the Democratic Party holds itself as the party of the middle class, but the middle class is growing. Yeah. Right? Recent economic reports, it continues to grow. As more people move up into the middle class, are they going to find themselves in this position of maybe, in contrast to where they were in their past life, when they really needed more from the federal government, and now they are having to give more to the federal government to offset those that need? Are we going to see this overall shift? And now I fall into this category where more of my money is going to Uncle Sam to help offset some of these commitments that are out there? I don't know.
Right, and I think that shift is inevitable. You look at somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who essentially, I don't want to round off here, but ran on some socialist principles, and you have the heads of the Democratic Party sponsoring her now.
No, she said flat out, "I am a socialist."
Right.
You're good there.
Yeah,
She said, "I am a socialist."
Right.
All right,
which is very Bernie Sanders-esque as well. Yeah,
Right.
That's picking up steam, and it's like, okay. Whoa. There are people in this party who don't agree with that, but now the leaders of it are saying, well, this is the way it's got to go. This is the future of the party. I understand parties shift. Of course they shift. Democrats are very different 200 years ago than they are now. Same with Republicans. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like, if you have this many people on board, what happens when that shifts? Like, where do those people fall off? Where do they go? Is there a place for them? And I don't know if there is.
Well, and I think what we find is, again, so let's go back. Let's shift now.
Yeah.
Let's shift to the Republican Party.
all right.
So during the 80s, right, so this was following the Carter administration. And then before that, of course, you had the Ford and then the Nixon administrations who, did not do any favors to the Republican Party. Then you have Carter come in, and then you have Ronald Reagan. Now, here is Ronald Reagan, a guy that comes in, owns the stage.
Yeah.
He was a natural-born performer because it's what he did in his career, right? Mm-hmm. He was eloquent in how he spoke. He spoke with authority. So we're coming off of this issue in Iran where they stormed a U.S. embassy and took hostages, and we're going into this. And here comes Ronald Reagan, this knight in shining armor on the white horse, who eloquently can say, here we are, Republicans. We've got the answers, and we're going to invite more people to the conversation. We're going to open up our tent. You are welcome to come in, and here's where we are. Fast forward past Bill Clinton into George W. Bush, and you have 9/11, a very similar world crisis. And I remember living life on September 12th, 2001.
It's a weird day.
It was. It was a day when we as Americans woke up and realized life is going to be different forever for those that lived through it and were old enough to comprehend what was happening, right? Because pre 9/11, we lived under this, I think, blanket of what Ronald Reagan had provided. We are powerful. Nobody's going to mess with us. And if they do, we will wipe them off the face of the earth.
A shining city on a hill.
That's right.
That was us.
That's
Yeah.
right. And in that place of comfort and protection, it's easy to want to be part of that, to feel like you have a voice. Fast forward to September 12th, 2001. Now, in the weeks and months that followed September 11th, 2001, we didn't identify ourselves so much with a party. It was a powerful time to be an American. I've never felt more of an American than I did on September 12th. In that moment of mourning, you found togetherness. You found this power of, listen, we may disagree on 90% of the issues, but we agree on our way of life and our ability to have these conversations and come together. And it was powerful. Nobody asked about party affiliation. I mean, you saw Congress standing on the steps of the Capitol, holding hands, praying together, singing hymns together, singing America the Beautiful together, and having this harmonious time of collective agreement on who we were as a society and as a country. And then we woke up from that dream. And over time, we ended up going back to the way things were, piece by piece, back into our segregated mindsets. And I think what happened to the Republican Party after that was it became all about security at all cost, protecting the homeland. And it changed the mentality in a way that we came in this constant state of war, not just with the outside world, but with one another too.
Patriotism turned to nationalism.
It did.
Right.
Instead of being proud to be an American, it's an American is better than you. And that's...
I mean, it starts off as a noble message, of course. Yeah, somebody's got to guard the front line. I respect that, of course.
Path to hell is paved with good intentions.
It's a slippery slope. Yeah,
it is, and I think where we find the Republican Party now, and we saw because Trump grabbed hold of that, because what happened was, following 8 years of George W. Bush, we had the Obama administration come in, and all these people on the left who were looking at what was happening to security and what was going on, where they felt infringed upon, so to speak, looked to the Obama administration as almost a recreation of what Reagan was for the Republican Party. Barack Obama was going to get to be for the Democratic Party. He was a guy that was an amazing orator, had an amazing way of speaking to people and grabbing them into the conversation. And it played well. It played well.
Played great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these weren't even close elections in 2004 and 2008.
2012.
In 2012.
Yeah.
Right? And there was this moment of America going back out into the world and getting that shining city on the hill persona back. And the problem was you still had this segment of the Republican Party who said, wait a minute, now you are potentially opening us up for another September 11th. And we took that to another extreme, wherein protecting America became more important than freedom.
What's weird about this for me is following, because your line of logic makes sense. Completely follow it. What gets weird is rather when presented with the opportunity in at least 2012, rather than nominate somebody who was a fighter, the Republican Party went for Mitt Romney, who was businessman. And then in 2016, it's kind of the same deal. Is we want a businessman. We want somebody who does business. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Because I think what happened was you saw in Mitt Romney this great businessman and almost a very statesman-like. If you ever saw Mitt Romney give a speech, it's hard not to think this guy is statesman-like. You know, he holds himself very well. He wasn't near angry enough for the far right side of this argument. He wasn't angry enough for this right side of the Republican Party who said protect America at all costs, both economically, socially, militarily. We need somebody who's mad and they're ticked off like we are. And Trump played into that brilliantly. So he was kind of the perfect storm of this economic mind, this businessman-like mind that Mitt Romney was, but he was able to tap into that angry aspect too. You've been out in the cold for the last 8 years. Nobody is listening to you. It's all about free stuff for everybody and bring everybody into the conversation. And in bringing everybody to the conversation, you have been left out of the conversation. And let's think about that, because what he got in return was a very motivated base, yet still not the most number of people to come out and vote.
Right.
He knew what he was doing. He managed it brilliantly. And he was elected. But now the Republican Party finds themselves in this crossroads of, do we want to win the next election, or do we want to set ourselves up for the next 20 years? Because I think what the Democrats have done is set themselves up to win potentially short-term elections, but not be able to deliver on their promises. The Republicans, in the same manner, if you're promising to fewer people, you can deliver on that, but are you alienating so many people now that you don't have enough people coming to the table that eventually they'll find a way to motivate their base? And I think where the Democratic Party has done themselves a disservice as of late is that they are standing for nothing except to be against Donald Trump.
#resist. Yeah, it's what is that? Yeah.
Well, and that's right. And so
I'm angry.
Their base, who has said, no, we want to be for something. The problem is it's so fragmented that you have this population that stands for this population stands for that, this population stands for this. All these different divisions within the Democratic Party want to stand up for what they believe in, and they're okay getting on board with what you believe in, so long as what they believe in is at the forefront, and the leadership within the Democratic Party can't figure out how to integrate all of this.
I think you'd mentioned a few weeks back when Cortez had come out and started saying abolish ICE, abolish ICE. The Democratic leadership was kind of like, well, hey, maybe slow down. And then she won, and now they're all right there with her. Like, oh, yeah, actually, no, we're on board with that.
Yeah.
It's like, what just happened?
It's a weird place to be in, because it's like you said, you've got the option. Do you want to win the next election, or do you want to set yourself up for success for a long time to come? I think when Obama won in 2008, that was the pivotal shift in the Republican Party, because not only did they start the Tea Party, but they started going after local elections. They started going after Senate seats, congressional seats, and they won a lot. It's why the current electoral map is where it is today, because they were playing it smart. They were playing the long game, and it worked. And it's worth noting that when in 2016, when Donald Trump wins, he says, I don't know who the Democrats are going to nominate next. I don't think any of us do. But besides that, 2020, you know exactly who to vote for. I'm running again. Like, he just already just says it right out. Like, this is what's going to happen.
He filed for a re-election the day after his election.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
trademarked all of the 2020 stuff.
Just
so he
letting
knew it
you know,
right off the bat.
way out front, this is where we're going. It's a strong message for any party to know, hey, this is the roadmap. It's a good move.
Yeah, it's a good move. It's a challenging move, though, too, at the same time, because now for those that find themselves to the right of things, but maybe not to the far right of things, are stuck in a crossroads.
One of the, not to cut you off there, one of the things I've seen with this, I have obviously many left friends. If you voted for Donald Trump, you are automatically sexist, misogynistic, you hate immigrants, there's this whole, you're now attached to this thing. Well, no. Historically, I voted Republican for fiscal responsibility. That doesn't mean I'm socially against all these other topics. The same way you vote red and blue. Just because you voted a little red doesn't mean that you're anti all this blue. And those people are now getting painted with a very wide brush, unfortunately, and that's not fair.
But that's the whole thing now. If you are pro one thing, that means you are anti something else.
And you are now stuck in that camp. You're attached to all of it.
That's right. And we through social media, through our ability to gather and get information wherever we see fit that fits our narrative, I mean, we now have the ability to put those blinders on and to never have them challenged anymore. Right, this whole last week there was this big take on what's going on with the free press, and I don't know if you're following this, but Sarah Huckabee Sanders came out, and there was this whole kind of back and forth with her and John, I can't remember his last name, from CNN, who he was asking her specifically, does the president believe this? And of course, she's in an impossible situation of trying to speak for President Trump, who might change his mind 3 times, or at least how he says something 3 times, And so instead, she pulled the attack CNN. That's the easiest place to go here, is if we just attack CNN. And to the credit of the other news networks, they kind of stood up for the reporter at CNN and said, no, let's have freedom of the press here. Let's let him ask this question as you keep trying to move on. But to her point, she's been attacked personally. In some ways, you could even argue physically, because she has to have secret. She's the only press secretary, I think, in the history of the presidency, of the administrations, that now has Secret Service protection, because she's in fear for her life. But she's in fear for her life because we're so polarized now, in that we cast this net. A couple weeks ago here in Texas, we had the young man who was wearing a Make America Great Again hat at a Whataburger, a burger joint, and was assaulted. A 17-year-old kid, 17-year-old kid, was assaulted because of a hat he wore.
Grown man came up at him.
That's right.
Good Lord.
And I'm glad that guy ended up getting arrested, and he's been charged with assault. I'm thrilled about that.
Sure.
Because he should. And just same thing. If you're wearing a Bernie Sanders is awesome T-shirt, and somebody comes up in a costume, listen, this is America. We should be able to air that, but then we should follow that up with a conversation. And I fear that, again, and I know we are a broken record on this show, but the whole point of this show is to say that somewhere in the middle, we can agree on some things and disagree on others, but we are still Americans. And we still want what is right for America. We may have different pathways of how we think we should get there. But progress is by coming together and figuring out where in the middle can we come on this. But again, going back to something we talked about 2 weeks ago, are we getting so polarized that the only people that ultimately we send to Washington end up on the far right and the far left, and thus nothing gets done because their motivation is not to move the needle. Their motivation is to get reelected, and they have figured out how to do that, and that is by casting these nets, whether wide or narrow, because that's who their constituents are, and that's who ultimately they're going to be elected by. But I think they're both painting themselves into a very precarious corner in doing that. Because eventually, as I said at the beginning of the show, those chickens will come home to roost. And America is a moving society. You look at electoral maps, you look at what's going on even here in Texas. 20 years ago, Texas was so far red it wasn't even funny. Before that, it was blue. And Richards got elected twice as a Democrat. Our state senators were Democrats because the Democratic Party was different then than it is now. And in the same way, the Republican Party is different today than it was then. And as we continue to see our political parties morph into a place of appealing to the few or the too many, we find ourselves more and more with a rising group of us in the middle, I think, who want to have a different conversation and want to say, well, we may agree or disagree on a big chunk of the issues. We can come together on these few. The question becomes, at the end of the day, how do you elect the people to make that happen?
And I think it's challenging coming off of 2016 because people had predictions about who was going to win the 2016 election. Of course they did. And a lot of people that didn't pan out the way they had predicted. You look like someone like Nate Silver on 538, who everybody said, what's your deal, man? You're supposed to be on top of this. And I think it's tough nowadays, at least for me. I have a challenge. I struggle with this. When people say, well, there's a whole lot of people in the middle, and there's some people here and some people here. Some people far left, some people far right, and those are the only voices you hear. They're the loudest, but most of us are in the middle. And it's tough to hear that from political analysts from like, yeah, but you also thought you had 2016 in the bag. Like, what if you're wrong? Like, what if it isn't that way? What are some, are there any like tent poles here that make you think, you know what, this is the way it is. I feel like I'm right about this. What do you got?
I would say that I have to agree with them. It does show that the far right and the far left do exist in a smaller number. It's about 15 to 20% on the right and left are far red or far blue. But then also show that they're the ones making up something like 60% of the local voting. They're the ones that show up. Only 46% of registered voters voted in the 2016 election. Where was 54% of people? Now, I understand some people, emergencies, sick, couldn't get out of work, even though you're supposed to, by law, be able to get out of work to go do this. Where were you?
Right.
So even though the middle is this majority, didn't show up.
Well, the middle's the majority, but also statistically, the middle is getting... The far right and the far left are squeezing out not only the airwaves, but they're finding a way to polarize the conversation. You had a statistic earlier. We were talking about, what was it, 36%? What was the statistic where you were talking about that historically those that had an opinion were there was an 18% divide and now it's like 36%
Yes. In 1994, there was only about a 15-point difference. This is from the Pew Research Center, about a 15% difference in opinion. Now, in 2016, we're closer to a 36% division, which you made the joke, it actually seems pretty small, but you're talking 36% of major issues, 1 in 3, that we're nowhere near each other on. That's a big number.
So that number's doubled. Mm-hmm. And so as we start to see this happening more and more, the challenge that you have is the opportunity for those of us to come into the middle and move the needle is becoming less and less because we're so polarized, we're so divided on this. We can't find a way to come back into the middle and make this happen because no longer am I loving you as my neighbor. Instead, I'm arguing with you, and I'm having a challenge with you, not because of necessarily one or two issues that we agree or disagree on. Rather, those few issues that we disagree on are effectively wiping off of the map all of the other potential issues that are out there. Because you disagree, pro-life versus pro-choice, right? If you are somebody who is pro-life...
Talk about a deal breaker.
I know, right? I don't care what you believe on every other issue out there. If you disagree with me on this, I have to oppose you on either side of that coin, right?
Yeah.
And we're starting to see that morph into other things. Gay rights, right? There are people that believe so strongly in gay rights or anti-gay rights that they can't come together on 90% of the other issues because they're so opposed on these. And I think your statistics are showing this, that we are finding ourselves in a place where we are further and further away from the middle. And those are the people that are gobbling up the airwaves and having conversations. In that it keeps us from finding a way to come together on the majority of issues where I think that we probably could come together on.
And you're right. So if you look at Alabama had, was it Doug Jones and Roy Moore in that special election? So all the way here or all the way there. So if you're somewhere, needle just a little bit one way or the other, you're going to have to cast your vote way further than you wanted to just to, again, prevent the other guy from winning.
Yeah.
Which is not how any of this was ever meant to work.
Correct. What is it Washington said when he left? Remember, guys, just don't do a two-party system.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, we're not wired for this kind of stuff, so it's challenging.
Well, listen, part of the conversation starts here, right? It starts with having it. And I know we didn't come down and support for or against anything here, except the fact that maybe we should just have more open dialogue about. All right, let's pick the big topics and let's set them to the side for a minute. And let's just pretend we're coming into this with an open mind on 90% of all the other topics that matter. And perhaps we can figure some things out. But again, going back to the original thing, I think what we're starting to see is this shift in the big party tent of the Republican Party has now moved into the narrow, smaller tent, and we're just going to double down on our base and hope that they show up. And the Republicans win if nobody shows up except... If the smaller the turnout, the more the Republicans are in advantage of that. And I think they understand that, and they're using that as a strategy. It's why you see so much in the news lately of, ID required at voting booths and whatever we can do to try to narrow the number of people that come, because the fewer people show up, the better Republicans do. In the same way, the Democratic Party is setting themselves up, I think, for a potential continuous challenge, specifically in the midterm elections, by overpromising and underdelivering.
Right.
Another good topic, Zach?
Thanks. Yeah, I hope so. I know it was a little bit more muddled than last week, but I like where the conversation's gone. I hope you guys feel the same way.
I do. I like this, and I like that we're having this conversation. I'm getting great feedback. Please do send in your feedback. There's a number of ways you can reach us. You can find us on Facebook at Facebook.com/Seth Denson Show. You can search somewhere in the middle. You can find me on Twitter at Seth Denson. You can email us at, is it SethDensonShow@gmail.com. There's a website now on Somewhere in the Middle Podcast.
Whoa.
.com.
.com. That's right. We have tried to put out as many ways for you to contact the show, but do us a favor if you are out there, if you're listening, if you agree with us or disagree with us, I'm okay with either one, because that's how we have a conversation. Tell me you don't agree with anything I've said. I'm fine with that. Let's have that as a conversation point. But go out and rate and review us so that we can know that.
Yeah.
And we can have a conversation. Maybe we'll even invite you into the show here. And listen, technology is great. You can Skype in.
Absolutely.
True.
Right?
We can do that.
Big TV right here. Let's go.
We can throw you on the big screen.
I love it. Well, listen, guys, thanks to the both of you. This was fun today.
Yeah.
I love these conversations. I look forward to Mondays. It's given me a reason to look forward to Mondays. Hopefully for you, our listeners out there, you're looking forward to Mondays too. Big thanks to all the folks here at Real News Communication Network. Saw Jeff Crilly walk in earlier into the studio. Big thanks to Jeff and his team here. Great folks. So honored and blessed to be associated with the team here. Andrew, man, I always appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great addition to the show. Zach, thanks for the topic. Thanks for leading the conversation a little bit.
Thanks.
And we appreciate that. Thanks to my beautiful wife, Jenna, my beautiful daughters, Emerson and Arabella. You are my reason, and Daddy loves you. And thanks for making me want to be a better daddy and a better man and a better American.
Aw.
So as we think through this topic of where we are as a society, where America stands in our two-party political system, I may be considering a number of things, but I do know where I land on this. Today in America, we seem to be in a constant state of division. We've talked about that time and again on this show. Whether it be race or religion, gender or economic class, we seem to be divided on all ends. And as a result, our two-party system has found a way to capitalize on this division, each offering something specific to every nuance of those things that make us unique and different. And in response, we give in, allowing our vote to be cast based on an R or a D next to a name rather than an issue or the actual person who could truly make the most positive impact on our country. In the same way, we have allowed our party affiliation to become our identity, and along with that, allow us to cast judgment upon one another just based on their identity. Ask yourself, how often have you thought less of a person when you saw them wearing a red Make America Great Again hat? Or a Bernie Sanders or Bust t-shirt? Just as we identify with our party, we have likewise grown to dislike others based on theirs. And why? Why are we seeking personal identity from the color of our bumper sticker? Are we really that petty? We look at the division in our society and we are so quick to blame the other guy for causing it. We have created dominance in the airwaves by making division a daily 24-hour event to throw ourselves into an echo chamber and tell us it's not our fault that something is wrong. It's the other guy's. But hang on a second. That can't be right. There are a few absolutes in the world, and of those that are, I'm pretty sure that one of them is not that my political party is blameless, guiltless, and all-knowing. So allow me to once again extend an olive branch to whomever disagrees with the statement that I just made. Whatever the size of the change we need, we agree that change is necessary, right? And with that one agreement, we have already proven that we can overcome just about anything. If we are able to take up that one step towards each other, we just might find a path towards the next step as well. If you and I each feel that this country needs change, great. Change is the only way we improve ourselves. So reach out to me on Twitter, email, or send a carrier pigeon for all I care. But not having a conversation is not an option. Let's talk to one another. They say that the hallmark of a good compromise is that nobody is happy about it. But we are all guaranteed that the pursuit of happiness is one of our unalienable rights. And that means we should always be able to talk about any subject. Nothing should be off the table. We are a generation blessed with access to more knowledge and information than at any other time throughout the course of human history. Surely we can figure a way out of this division and partisanship and towards compromises. Scriptures tell us that there is no greater commandment than to love your neighbor as yourself. If this is the case, perhaps we should think more about what we can do for others than what is in it for me. Love your neighbor is often quoted, it's often thought, but often forgotten. You needn't be a person of faith to recognize that we are all in this together, and neither your gender, your race, or your religion, nor something as truly as insignificant as your political party affiliation should divide us. Life is rarely all or nothing. We should all keep an open mind. Let's talk with those that we normally wouldn't because they may not agree with us. It could be life-changing. And on a more personal note, for those that I may have dismissed or disliked over the years based on nothing more than whom you voted for in an election, I'm sorry. I'm working at this listening thing too. And I'd like to think I'm getting better at it all the time. Take these small steps with me. Love your neighbor. Listen with an open mind. And don't simply hate the person across the aisle from you just because of where they land on things. If we take these steps, we just might cover the majority of the distance between that which divides us. Finding myself somewhere in the middle, I'm Seth Denson.